Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas. I'm going to be your host today, and we're going to be talking about using fulfilling strategies to create long-term sustainability. Now, achieving commercial success from an initial release is always a challenge for small indie studios, but developing lasting sustainability in a constantly changing landscape is an entirely different feat. So today, we're going to explore strategies that promote sustainability by identifying key elements that can contribute to sustainability and how to strike a balance between creativity and commercial viability so we can discover fulfilling ways that help us reach sustainability. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey, everybody, and we're back. And today with us, I have Helen Carmichael of Gray Alien Games. Helen, how are you doing today? And thank you for being on the show.
Oh, well, thank you very much for inviting me. Yeah, I'm doing great. Thank you very much.
Great to hear. And folks, for those of you who aren't familiar with Helen, she is the co-owner of the studio with her husband, Jake Burkett. And that's also her business partner too. And, you know, like I said, Gray Alien Games, and they have been in business for over 10 years now. Such a great accomplishment. And during that time, specifically, Helen, you've managed everything from core operations that range from like design, art direction, writing, publishing, marketing, and so many other, like talking about like someone who wears multiple hats. You're definitely one of those people and doing it so well. I mean, we'll get into it in a moment, but you also, from the writing perspective, have worked on a lot of other projects too, not just, you know, the own under Gray Alien. And, you know, some of these projects, one in particular that you might recognize because it just came out recently is Regency Solitaire 2, released on the PC. There's some other titles Gray Alien produced that you may be familiar with, like T-30, Ancient Enemy, Shadow Hand, and of course, Regency Solitaire 1. And you've worked on other writing projects too, like for several years. You know, Medieval Colony Sim, Going Medieval, done some work for Cartel. I mean, just lots of experiences there. And I mean, the awards, organizations, I mean, you received IGF Honorable Mention for design for Ancient Enemy. And this is something I really want to learn more about. One of the organizations you're involved with is Autistica Play. Please share a little bit more information about that.
Yeah, sure. Okay, well, thank you very much for that nice introduction, Andrew. Yes, obviously, as somebody who just runs a small indie studio where there's only two of us, I do end up wearing a lot of hats. And it's good to be able to multitask, and it's good to be able to learn lots of different skills. So obviously didn't necessarily come into this with all the right skills because I originally had a different area, but eventually, and through various work and trial and error and learning, partly learning from Jake, who's, as you said, partner as well, who'd been in this business a bit longer. I've definitely learned quite a lot about game development over the past decade. Autistica Play, that's basically when I was in my early 40s, I discovered that I was autistic, which was a bit of a surprise. And I had a lot of thinking to do about my own work after that. And as a result, I heard about an organization in the UK who basically at the intersection of an autism charity and working with gamers and game companies. So they look at the side. And I thought they were great. They definitely were all about spread the word about accessibility, trying to help more autistic people into employment, games industry, and also just trying to acknowledge that young autistic people quite like to game together as a way of socializing and getting that's more comfortable for many of them than and some in-person events and so on and so forth. So it's just a really interesting organization to be part of. And I've met some other interesting game developers as a result of that as well. So that's been really
that is just, so awesome, Helen. And in particular, because like just the story that came from that, and then from everything else, like the advocacy and how you're involved and with this group that really does a great job at supporting and advocating in so many different ways. So it's just so nice to hear your involvement there and everything else. Again, thank you for sharing that story too. But on top of that too, outside of that organization, you're also like involved in a lot of Discords to help with mentoring and such. Speaking events, I mean, you've done various talks in the past covering indie game development, to celebrating and supporting neurodiversity, of course. And then I think this is a great one to call out to. You did a talk called Married Indies and how to ship a successful game without killing your spouse.
How that came about was Jake and I were thinking of a talk that we could give at an event in London, and it was shortly after I'd started working with him, because he was working in games for longer than I was. And one of the first comments many of my friends and acquaintances said when I said I was working with my husband was, "Oh my goodness, I couldn't work with my spouse. I'd want to kill them. They drive me mad." And it was like this really surprisingly common comment from people that they'd want to kill their spouse if they had to work with them all day long. So I thought, okay, well, let's turn that around and turn it into the title for a game. But it got a surprisingly big audience, and people did want to know how we managed that. And I think one of the secrets is lots of schedules and separate offices and separate space. I mean, Jake likes to code with loud music on, and I like peace and quiet when I'm working. So we work together, but separately, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, because I mean, there's a dynamic where it's working with any type of team, but when it's your spouse, partner, or whoever, I mean, that dynamic is definitely a lot different than what we would see in most working business cultures. So
sure. I think one of the issues with it really is just that you do think about and talk about your business a lot. So it can be quite hard to unwind and not be chatting about business ideas when you're sitting around watching TV in the evening or whatever. It's, oh, I've had this brilliant idea for this thing. That can be great. It can be creative as well, but it's quite hard to switch off.
Yeah. I can relate too, where my wife gets home from, she's a teacher, and usually the other doesn't necessarily, we do our best and try to learn, but sometimes like I might hear from her a lot more gossip stuff about students, and, but when you have someone energized to be like, oh yeah, this happened today, because it's all relative and stuff. Yeah. I could see where that synergy really takes off and is great to have. So awesome. So all these things, great accomplishments, great things that you're doing, great conversations too. I'm curious, because you guys are, always working together, you're working at home and everything else. When you're not so involved in making games and the business that comes with it, what else are you guys doing in your free time? What are you doing to unplug?
What do we do to unplug? Well, just speaking to Jake for a moment, he's run a very successful Aikido club for many years. I think he's a 4th Dan black belt now. So that's his hobby, which he loves, and he sometimes travels to other places to study Aikido. And we have 2 sons, and one of them has learned to do that as well. So yeah, that's what he goes off and does. But I've never got involved in that. I've always had separate hobbies of my own, because obviously we need to spend a bit of time doing our own thing. I'm really into plants. I studied a bit of herbalism just as a hobby, which I got really into. And I quite like growing plants you can use for dyeing things, or other sort of interesting plants that you can do things with. So yeah, I've been really into gardening and growing things the last few years. And recently I've just got an allotment. I'm not sure what you would call that in the United States, because I know we have
some land,
like a little plot of land, just a little plot of land. That's right, that we're allowed to grow vegetables and things on. So that's my new project, and I get to fulfill my Stardew Valley fantasy, like growing little rows of plants, hopefully. So I like that, and it is kind of quite interesting. I've had this conversation with other game developers before, how life sometimes kind of imitates art. So it is quite interesting that I've been into gardening the last few years, and I've ended up writing a game where you build a garden, right? That's kind of the meta game in Regency Solitaire 2. And there's lots of garden themed things in the game. And so it's been a fun thing to think about because it's something I'm enthusiastic about anyway. And yeah, sometimes that happens. I mean, I was just speaking earlier about finding out I was autistic later in life, which was a bit surprising. And it was kind of ironic that at that time, around that time, it occurred to me later that I'd been writing a game about a woman who gets things done by wearing a mask. And sort of taking on other identities to get by in daily life is quite a common thing for a lot of autistic people. So I didn't really realize I was doing it consciously at the time, but looking back, it did really mirror what was going on in my personal life. So yeah, that was just an interesting aside, really. But you can definitely get inspiration from the things that you're enthusiastic about or going through in your life to make games.
Yeah, no, isn't that funny how that works, right? And you sharing that has me recalling a fairly recent episode with Heidi Mata, the manager of OK Extreme Games. They made Celeste, and that's like a philosophy that they practice too. The studio does, is like focusing on like hobbies and things, and her sharing that was like also stating like, oh, because of the founder's interest in mountain climbing, was part of the premise of Celeste, right? So it's funny how intrinsic all these things are with like hobbies and other fulfilling things that actually aid in the whole game development process. So I love that you share that too, because it's like, I keep seeing these themes that happen over in time. And here's just another great example of that. And not only that, it's also extremely fulfilling and relaxing, especially with the gardening. You got your plot. I mean, I can only imagine like what kind of things you're essentially creating and growing and things. Like, it's just awesome stuff. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right. Well, we got to know about you a little bit, but we want to get to know you a little bit more by having you go through the Q box round. Now, folks, for those of you who aren't familiar, the Q box round is just a few random questions I prepared for Helen today. So, Helen, are you ready for the Q box round?
Go for it.
All right. What would you say is your most influential or inspiring game?
Well, the most inspiring one is simple. That's Skyrim, just because I just love playing it so much. But what's probably more interesting for your listeners is the most influential was a very, very early game that came out on the BBC computer called Granny's Garden. I think it was probably kind of an 8-bit type thing. Very simple, text-based adventure aimed at primary school children. And the reason it was influential to me is that along with a couple of other school kids who weren't so keen on going outdoors and doing sports, a few of us were allowed to mess around with coding and mess around with this Granny's Garden game when we were maybe 8-9 years old. And this was in the stage where there was one computer for an entire primary school, and it got wheeled in on a trolley, and it was, about the size of a house, So just to give some context, we're going back to the late 1980s or early 1990s here. So this game, Granny's Garden, had a witch in it, and who came out and said something mildly mean. And me and a friend hacked into the back end of this. I mean, it's very simple, but we hacked into it and we started messing around with the words, and we changed the things that the granny was saying in Granny's Garden. So I haven't gone on to, I didn't pursue coding, unfortunately. I did mess around with it a bit when I was very young. But even despite that, it's kind of ironic that as a career, 30 odd years later, I'm writing the words for video games. So I think Granny's Garden probably put the idea in my head that if you can make up your own story and stick it in a game.
That is awesome, because I can only imagine maybe some of the things that you were putting in there, but still such a enlightening story too. And on a quick side note, I thought it was so funny when you said Skyrim in terms of inspiring, because as you were talking a moment ago about the gardening and how that related to other projects and such, I was like, oh, I like playing Skyrim. I call it virtual hiking. I love hiking, but I also like playing Skyrim for the virtual aspect of it. And then you say Sky, and I was like, okay, it's coming together.
Yeah. Just wandering around and exploring in the environments, even chatting to the NPCs, even if they say the same thing over and over again. It's just, it's a very friendly and welcoming environment to me. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Next is, what's the most common mistake you see companies make in the industry with their businesses?
Okay. I'm going to say it's probably growing too fast and hiring too many people. And that's in a specific set of circumstances. So I'm thinking maybe somebody's just got a bunch of funding, for this game, and it seems like a ton of funding, and now they think they can spin up and hire an office and fill it with people. Or maybe they've just had one game that was a smash hit. And, we've been kicking around good friends with many developers in a bunch of different countries and markets over the years. And one of the patterns we've definitely seen among our friends basically is often people building up a team or a studio, and within a couple of years it doesn't quite meet that promise and people have to get laid off, or the company has to get bought by someone else, and that's really sad. So I don't think there's anything wrong with trying to create jobs for people, of course. I guess our approach has just been to stay small, and that suits us. So yeah, I just think that's it's a really tricky thing for people who run studios, because obviously they want to grow and they want to involve more people and make more jobs. But I just think it's a really hard thing to do sustainably.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, hey, when you get to a point, you need to scale, but it's again such a fine balance and everything else, and it's hard to keep all those things in check, even if you're really good at them. That doesn't mean to say that other things can't happen. And
and I think also it can be really hard to be a person who is really good at managing a business and has the business skills and experience and contacts and routes to finance, and simultaneously be a person who really understands games.
Yep.
I mean, obviously there are huge companies out there who manage to do this by having lots of different departments or specialisms, but for a smaller team, I think it can be really, really hard to juggle all of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. So no, that's a good one. And last but not least, and the staple here on the show is, what game are you playing now?
Okay, a couple of things. So the main game I've been playing for the past few weeks, I must admit, is Regency Solitaire 2, my own game. And the reason for that is that it just literally launched like a little over a week ago. So I was testing it right up till the last minute and looking for bugs and checking the Steam achievements worked and all that kind of stuff. I'm pleased to say it's fine and it doesn't crash, and it runs great. Lots of people have been enjoying it. But yeah, other than that, I've only just managed to carve out a bit of free time to actually play games for fun that I haven't been testing and so on. But I've tried out Balatro, like a lot of people, because that's just come out and that's done fantastically well. So I wanted to see what the secret sauce was with that. I've definitely got sucked in and ended up, having that, just one more round. I think it's a really fun game. I think it's cleverly made. Perhaps, I don't know how simple it seems to people, but I think it's got a lot going on there, and I think it's very clever. So I've been enjoying that, and I'm sure I'm going to play a bit more of that in the next few days. So that's just me playing on my PC, but also in the evenings, Jake and I often sit around and sort of play a game together, some sort of RPG in the sitting room, on the console. So yeah, we're playing Outer Worlds, which I don't know if you've heard of that game. It's a sort of RPG set in space. And it has a lot of cynicism about kind of capitalism and business and humans being expendable. But if you like the sort of wry sense of humor, and it's got fantastic environments as well, some good little missions. So we're enjoying that. It's great.
Awesome. Well, again, can't thank you enough for sharing that insight, and so we can get to know you a little bit more. And now that we have, I'd love to get into the heart of this conversation, which is, as I mentioned earlier in the show's intro, using fulfilling strategies to create long-term sustainability. And, let's face it, something that I would say probably a majority of us, especially our listeners, are probably looking to achieve. Now, to kick this off, I want to ask you, what do you believe are the key elements that can contribute to a sustainable small indie studio?
I think there's probably quite a lot of ingredients. We've already mentioned this idea that if you're in the smaller the team you're in, the more different skills you're going to have to have. You're going to have to be like a jack of all trades, master of none, as they say. But unfortunately, you're going to end up having to be a master of some of them as well if you're going to succeed. So there's a lot of learning to do and a lot of different skills to get a handle on. So, I think first and foremost, some of the most important skills are the ability to run a small business. So I don't think if you're somebody who's just, say, good at code or just good at art, but doesn't have any background in business practices, filling out tax forms, finance, business bank accounts, all that kind of possibly slightly dull to some people things that go on in the background of keeping a business ticking over. That stuff's absolutely essential. And I think the sooner a person, either hires somebody with those skills or gets their head around those skills themselves, the better for them and the quicker they'll succeed and the more they'll, understand what they need to do to keep their business going sustainably. So that's really important. And it doesn't really have much to do with games. It's just to do with any business, I think, to be honest. Another thing I'd say is to kind of get quite clear with yourself or with your small team, if you've got a small team, as to what success actually means to you and what your goals are. And the reason I'd say that is that the situation can vary hugely depending on people's circumstances. So, depending on whether you're living in a part of the world where the cost of living is very low, or perhaps you're somebody who is independently wealthy or has some other income coming from somewhere. People's situations vary widely. So if you're that kind of person, then you might be happy to just make a game, get it out on Steam, say, make a reasonable amount of sales. But if you don't make enough money to make your next game, that's not the end of the world. You can live with that. But then again, there might be other people who've got various employees or contractors who are relying on them, who need the money. They need the money. They've got bills to pay. They've got high overheads. So just kind of figuring out the scope of what you're intending to achieve and how many people you mean to reach and what kind of platforms you want to get it on and what sort of audience you're aiming for is really important to know whether when you've completed your project, you're going to feel like it's a success for you, because it doesn't matter whether someone else says, oh, you've got to sell 10 million copies of something. If that's not your goal and your goal was to sell like 1,000, that's fine. That's fine. But as long as that's within your business parameters that you've already set up for yourself and that that's going to be sustainable and okay for you. So that's really important. And I think along with that comes kind of like not comparing yourself with other people or other businesses too harshly. Because, sure, someone else might have some amazing success and you might be envious of them, but their circumstances or goals might be very different to yours. So, there's not really much point in doing that. We can learn from each other for sure and get advice and information, but comparing your situation directly isn't always terribly helpful and can be a bit demotivating, I think, for some people starting out or earlier on in their careers as well.
Yeah. I mean, I would say absolutely, especially that last point. Folks, for those of you who've been listening for a while, that's not the first time. This is not the first time I'm going to be saying this, but compare and despair, right? It's not worth it. And as Helen clearly noted, looking at other companies to at least maybe, talk to, get ideas, collaborate, or whatever the case may be, but don't look at them and start comparing yourself to them because you don't know their situation. And as you provide with lots of different examples, their goals may be different from yours. Their situation may be very different from yours. So how could you possibly compare yourself to them, even if you have a sense or idea that maybe you're on similar playing fields, you may not be, or whatever the case may be. So I love that point. And then, and as you said too, the goals, so important. Sometimes we don't think about those as detailed as we probably need to. And then, running a business, if you're looking for any type of commercial success, however that's defined, you still need to understand about like running that business. So such great points. And again, like you mentioned earlier, there's probably lots of different elements and factors that go into those things, but those are some really good ones and appreciate you laying those out. Now, I want to get into a conversation about creativity and commercial viability, because to start, some of the things you outlined too, for some people in studios, they might be thinking, well, that doesn't sound creative. That doesn't help me with like, I want to lead with my passion and everything. And understandably so, like there needs to be a balance there. So I'm kind of curious though, especially for those that might have difficulty with this. How do you balance creativity and commercial viability when designing and marketing your games? Because a lot of people are struggling with this.
Yeah, I mean, I think you need both sides. You need the kind of cool head and the planning and the schedule and the finance. The kind of production, the producer, basically the production head, who's saying, okay, well, that's a brilliant idea, Bob, or whatever, but can you actually make that in 12 weeks, or is that pie in the sky? So you need that aspect. But on the other hand, of course, you need creative ideas, and you need to ideally be doing something that you enjoy to some extent. I mean, I think part of the issue in the game industry is a lot of people think they can just do their dream project, and I'm not sure that's always viable. And I'm not sure that's always great for people starting out either. I think sometimes you might have to work on a few things that aren't your favorite thing to get experience, because you'll still be learning about the systems and the processes, and that's all good. But yeah, what we tend to do is we do let creative ideas run riot at certain stages in our coming up with the game. And we'll have brainstorming, and especially when we're doing design, we'll start with something quite structured, and then we'll just be coming up with all sort of wild ideas about how this might work and that might work and how the pieces might fit together. But at the same point, we always have to keep bringing them back to systems that we know are going to work in a game and things that people are familiar with. Because at the end of the day, let's be honest, most people want to play a game that they kind of recognize. They recognize the genre, they recognize how it works. And a lot of people play the same sorts of games over and over again. So you have to come up with something that you can, perhaps there's a twist. Perhaps it's just that the art style is completely unique, but the gameplay is very familiar. Perhaps, in our case, our games, they're solitaire games. Solitaire games have been made many times before, but our twists were, one was kind of the historical, the highly accurate sort of Jane Austen-like story and environment that hadn't been done before, and that twist worked. And another twist that we've had on solitaire games is to make them into a combat driven by solitaire. So kind of a bit like Puzzle Quest, but instead of the Puzzle Quest, engine in the middle, it's got solitaire in the middle. Those are the only changes we made. The rest of the gameplay we kept very familiar to people who were like, oh yeah, I played Puzzle Quest. I understand how this works. I understand how this is going to be. So I think it's a continual case of expanding and contracting. So you expand and you throw all the exciting ideas out there, but then you have to contract again and see which ones are actually going to stick. And just like writing, they say kill your darlings, which basically means the bit of writing you're most proud of and, puffed up about is often the bit you probably ought to cut because it's a bit too silly. And I think that's very true of games as well. Sometimes there are things that we really love the idea of, and in the end, we just have to not use them because they don't fit with the rest of the game. We've got to be realistic. It's about the player experience at the end of the day. You've got to give them what they enjoy and something that's fun. It's got to have that the secret sauce, the fun. So you might have thought of a whole bunch of extra gameplay that you wanted to include as an interesting side quest, but if it isn't fun, it's not going to stick around. Sorry, just have to put it back in your ideas folder for another day.
Yeah, I love that you close with that, because at the end of the day, it is about if that experience is fun. And especially for that audience and such, because if it's not, it's not going to be worth it. Yeah, you can get experience making a game, but really that's what it comes down to. But the thing I love the most, to distill what you mentioned, is that expanding and contracting, because I think that example is better than us trying to think, a balance. Like a lot of times, if you were to visualize balance, what might it be? And you could picture maybe scales, right? But it doesn't mean that those scales are always going to be level with each other. There's going to be moments where they're completely offset. So you have your creativity, like you said, with you guys, it runs riot. And then you start, limiting it and bringing it back down, and then to a point where maybe it is balanced, or maybe now the more commercial side of things is starting to take over. But that, I think, through that process, as you outlined and probably alluded to, now that idea, that passion and everything, through that process of rebalancing or shifting weight to the commercial, now that essential idea is very focused and has a lot of drive and intent behind it, as opposed to just lots of different ideas that are maybe we could do this or this, but now it's like it's dialed in, ready to go. And then when the commercial side of things is is higher ups or lower, however you're looking at the scale, then it almost like gives you that purpose or intent, as opposed to trying to find out what that sweet spot is. Because again, it's like a moving target in a way, but I love how you phrase that, because it's a better way of looking at it, as opposed to saying, oh, we need to balance these things. Because let's face it, folks, there's never going to be a complete balance to the type of work or what you're doing. There's always going to be shifts in that process.
Yeah. I liked how you explained that. This idea of distilling something that's the best possible experience is really important. But the other thing that's interesting is when you're thinking about your two sides of the scale and you're talking about sort of commercial being the other side of the scale than creative. I think there's a meta game here if you're part of a small indie studio. And the meta game is the game of running your studio and the game of making games. So if you look at it that way, then this idea of the commercial side of the scale being kind of less creative could be reframed, because that's the side where you're actually going to get creative about how you distill your ideas into the commercial product that's going to reach the most people, or that's going to get the best reviews because people are having so much fun playing it, or how you're going to reach a new audience by sharing it on a different platform that it hasn't been on before, or something like that. So, and that those things can be creative too. They're very creative and often involve sort of big business ideas being spun up, among different parties. So you might be talking to a publisher, or you might be talking to someone who's got funding, and I think it's just worth remembering that those things can be very creative in their own right. It might not seem as fun, as actually making the game, but the whole thing comes together if you've got a sort of creative business approach in addition to actual creativity within your game development, and together, that can make for a really good product that's well received and enjoyed by a lot of people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just great way to paraphrase everything that we just discussed, because again, just looking at things differently can make all the and understanding the importance of what you're doing and who it's for can make all the difference, and how you achieve your goals and everything else. And speaking of achieving goals, I want to shift the conversation now to talk about building fulfilling sustainability. And just for like my idea of that is, it's one thing to be sustainable, right? There can be any number of things that you do as a game business. I mean, for very quick high level example, some businesses make their own IPs while they work on other projects, or they work for higher studios as well too. But for some people that might not be as fulfilling as they would like it to be for any number of reasons. So in terms of long-term sustainability, from the focus of what I defined as fulfilling, what strategies do you employ to ensure that your studio remains viable and continues to thrive?
Yeah. Okay. Well, obviously, as you've said, this is about, us and what we need and what we've decided as a couple and as a business works for us, and other people's studios might have different values. So that's fine. But one of the ones that we've actually put right near the top, and there are very good reasons for this, is health. This idea of looking after yourself and your team from every different angle you look at it, really, whether that's because the person on your team, has a hidden disability, as you later discover, like myself, whether somebody on your team has a long-term health problem, whether they have some kind of, injury from overwork, which both of us have suffered from at various points, from bad ergonomics, this kind of thing, or whether they're just burnt out, overworked, need a break. All of those kind of things can really impact on your business. And when there's only two of you working together, it's really, really important that you do things to look after yourself to avoid those things. Because if one or both of you is sort of taken out by health issues for any period of time, 2 or 3 weeks, and if you think there's only two of you, that's a huge impact on the amount of business you can get done. So So we do really prioritize that. And, that can mean taking days of rest, going off and doing gentle sports or exercise, or having walks up and down in the sunshine just to kind of get out and about, touch grass, as they say. Yeah. Or it can be, spending money on things to take care of your body or mind. Any of those things are all really, really important. One of the other sort of qualities, I guess, that we think about between the two of us is this idea of sort of perseverance. I think we've talked a lot about adaptability already, this idea that you might need to chop and change, maybe have to work with other indies or other publishers or other businesses, or get on board with a whole new skill that you don't know about. But the other side of that, I guess, is perseverance, that sometimes you've just got to chip away at a big problem or a big bunch of code or a big pile of marketing contacts or whatever it is that you need to do. And sometimes it can be tough, and sometimes it can be dull, or sometimes it can be very technical in ways that can be quite boring, and you have to look up a lot of things and Google a lot of things and ask for a lot of help, and it's a struggle. So just having that kind of perseverance and keeping your goals in mind, and knowing why you're doing it, and having a sort of an overview of what the whole project is and what you're aiming for is really important in those times. And reaching out for help, obviously, if you are struggling with any aspect of it, is really important. But business sense, which I keep coming back to, but we've chosen to stay, I guess, lean is how some people put it. There's just a small business. But we do have a really huge network of business contacts, both in the UK and overseas. Both of us lived and worked in Vancouver in Canada for 4 years. So we've got all sorts of contacts in the game industry, particularly on the West Coast, but across North America, we know a lot of people. We try and go to conferences when we can. And so we've met people from other parts of the world also when we've had the opportunity. Just thinking, we've traveled to Latvia and Croatia and places like that to meet, different groups of people who may be from Eastern Europe or wherever, who we wouldn't normally meet at some of the other game conferences. And we've learned a lot from those people, and we share what we're doing and they share what they're doing. Sometimes that leads to business, but often it just leads to sort of sharing of intelligence and information. So I just think that the feeling that indie studios can cooperate and can share information and can help each other out. Sometimes that's in a financial or business way, but sometimes it's just, with a friendly helping hand with some practical issue. That's really, really important. And I think if you're a small studio, I just couldn't recommend more getting to know other developers in your area, or going to conferences where you can meet people from further afield, or joining Discords where there's friendly developers chatting about whatever topic. I mean, for example, I've got a marketing Discord that I go on all the time. I think you're part of that too. And, I've met people and had opportunities based on that. I've learned things from other people. I've shared some things that have worked for me, and other people have said that has been helpful to them. So yeah, anything like that is really, really important. And it can seem like it's taking up a lot of your time and not necessarily paying off in the short term or in an obvious way. But I would say it's really valuable, and it's important to keep doing it at least part of your week or part of your month, on a rolling basis, because it can lead to some fantastic opportunities down the road. And also just feeling that you're part of a supportive community, I think, is really, really important if you're in a small team. Another thing just to say that I think we do a lot of, and I'm not sure people realize how much people in a small studio, particularly perhaps if you've worked in a larger studio or AAA, you'd realize how much time people spend on this. When you think of game development, you probably think we're sitting around designing games all day, or plugging in art, or coming up with music or something like that. But a really, really large percentage of our time is spent on business development, or biz dev, as we'd call it. And this can be making deals, dealing with platforms that we sell things on, setting up bundles of games, setting up sales, looking at who's been streaming our game, trying to get people to stream our game, talking to, potential platforms that we're not on yet about a specific game, teaming up with other studios to create bundles with them, or offers or deals, all of that stuff, and there's often a lot of paperwork that goes on behind the scenes with that as well, and figures that need to be dealt with, and budgets and whatnot. So again, that's the side of it that I would call the meta game. That's the game of running your studio, and it's really important. And there's a flip side to that as well, which is to do with government sort of subsidies and tax breaks and things like that. So whatever country you're in, it's really good to be in contact with the organizations that support game companies, and to know what you can claim or what funding opportunities there are and things like that as well. Because honestly, sometimes you can blink and you'll miss them, and then you'll think, oh goodness, that opportunity would have been so perfect for my current project, and you've missed it by a couple of weeks. That's definitely happened to me in the past. So just constantly trying to keep, it's a lot of things to keep juggling in the air, but just keeping abreast of that kind of stuff can really, really pay off and help your studio keep going. I mean, definitely in this country, we have something called video game tax relief, which I think is going to change its name in the next 12 months to something else. But basically, yeah, if you're spending money on the sort of R&D side of making a game, or contractors within the UK, you or I think even Europe, you can literally claim some of it back as tax relief, and that's invaluable if you're a small studio with a limited budget to be able to do that. It makes it far more viable for you to make a game. Sure.
And I love everything that you outlined, because if you look back at some of these topics, folks, I mean, it's everything from health, perseverance, adaptability, business sense. But it's, again, if we look back at the example that Helen provided earlier, expand and contract, that I would say is applicable to these areas as well. I mean, sometimes there are things going on simultaneously. Sometimes there are going to be efforts that are more focused on one area than another. But just, again, think of that changing scale. So there's never going to be a fine balance that these things are always going to be happening at the same time. But there is going to be those moments of contracting and expanding in these areas. So it's like the whole concept can apply on a micro level, but also on the macro when you're looking at the passion and drive to the commercial aspects too. And also, Helen, I want to call out and thank you for, again, mentioning about the adaptability, because I know I probably let in with the idea that, oh, if we're doing these activities, and I'm not saying that you implied this, but if we're doing these activities, they're not fulfilling. And in some cases they may be, in others they might not be. I know I've spoken to many studios that are like, oh, we want to do more of our own projects as opposed to working on all these other things for other people. But to your point, yes, you still may need to do those, because at the end of the day, it comes down to those expanding and contracting. Maybe now you need to put in more effort to get to the point where that sustainability is fulfilling. And there could be lots of other reasons and things that are involved too, but I just appreciate you calling that out as well, because it is important to understand that, again, sustainability is also to a degree about surviving. And as you know, and sometimes that's not a term we want to think about, but it's also being realistic. So looking at those things that, hey, look, does this make sense to do this? Is it going to help me achieve what my goals are in the long run? They all work in some form or another, but at the end.
Yeah. And I think as well, on the point about contracting, for example, I mean, I've gone looking for additional writing work when Jake has been completely busy flat out with all the stuff he's had to do, but I've had a bit of free time on my schedule. I thought, okay, I'm going to look for extra writing work. And, one of the projects I mentioned before was writing for Going Medieval, the colony sim. And the people who make that, Foxy Voxel, they're based out of Serbia. And they're a fantastic team. And I've absolutely loved working on that game. And it isn't the type of game that I could have built myself, or not necessarily one that I would have been involved in, but the topic and the type of writing was absolutely up my street. And I've learned loads of things from them, from working with them, about how to do all kinds of stuff and how they put their game together. It's been a growth experience. It's been a learning experience to work with that team. So I just think even something that might sound like, oh, no, I'm not doing my own thing, I've got to work on another project for someone else, or, oh, I've been put on this project, it's not my first choice. Sure, sometimes I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Sometimes things can suck and you end up doing a job that you don't really enjoy. And we've all been there. But at the same time, I just think you've got to be open sometimes to trying some of these things out. I've been writing for them for years now, and their games like an early access, games as a service, early access, then games as a service model. So they're going to, as far as I know, they're going to keep adding stuff for the foreseeable future. And I'm happy to pop in and write a few bits about, medieval building materials one week, or what are the words for various bits of strange foodstuffs that were available, or it's a different thing every time because they're like, all right, now we're adding watery areas to the game, and suddenly you find yourself writing about swamps and fishing or something, and you have to go and do all this research. I love that stuff. It's really fun, and I like working with them on that. So it's not a massive part of my time or income, but it's a fun side quest, and I don't know. I think it's nice to be open to fun side quests from time to time.
Yeah, I absolutely love that you share that too, because it makes a good point where, sometimes, studios might be in a position where, hey, some people are in a holding pattern because they can't do what they need to do because they're waiting on other things to come through. So to look for opportunities essentially in those moments where like, okay, what else can I be doing to contribute to X, Y, or Z? And in your case, you're like, hey, maybe I can learn something new. Maybe we can get some extra income to support the studio, whatever it may be. But in doing so, it's like, like you said, sometimes those experiences can suck, and sometimes they could lead into other really fulfilling projects like you just shared with us. So I'll just reiterate what you just said. Keep that mind open and maybe look for those opportunities. And they might not always seem like an opportunity, but sometimes they could be a blessing in disguise in a lot of different ways. So I love that you shared that. Well, before we get to closing here, I'm just naturally curious and everything, and kind of as it relates to our subtopic here, is there anything that you can like discuss about upcoming projects or even some initiatives, your studio is working on, and in line with that, like what excites you the most about them?
Okay, well, we've ended up probably spending too long making Regency Solitaire 2. So it's come out and it's been really successful, but at the same time, we were hoping to have it done, considerably earlier than we did. So, but the side effect of that is that we've got a couple of other projects kind of coming down the line that are sort of coming thick and fast behind it. So I think we've gone from having a couple of years of not releasing anything to suddenly releasing 2, maybe 3 games even within the next 12 months, which is an exciting prospect, definitely. We've definitely got some more work to do with Regency Solitaire 2, because at the moment it's out on PC for kind of Steam, and then on Itch, and it's going to be on GOG and some of those kind of places, Green Man Gaming, Fanatical, and so on. We've got a bunch of casual game portals who obviously their players really love solitaire games and puzzle games and so on. So sort of your Game House, Big Fish Games and people. So we're still making a few we're adding more stuff in actually to the game to suit those players because they have specific kind of requirements. So we're literally just going to be working on that for a couple more weeks. But it's very encouraging because basically now the game has come out, people are raving about it, and we're getting some big streamers playing it, and it's getting some really nice reviews online and stuff. So that's really gratifying. But we have another title called Shadow Hand, which came out a few years ago. And this is one of our games I talked about where solitaire is kind of the driver of a card battle. So it's like a card battling game. And it's got an RPG element where you collect bits of costume, and it's sort of set in the late 1700s in Britain. And there's kind of smugglers and highwaymen and stuff like this around. So that's kind of the vibe. But we're hoping we're going to adapt that and make a version of it that's actually simpler. That sounds a bit strange, but we're going to take some of the RPG-like elements out of it, or at least make them a little bit more manageable to try and sell that in the casual space as well, because we mainly targeted the kind of Steam audience with that initially. So that's kind of a retooling of something we've already made, but to make it into a slightly different game. And we're really far along with that. So we're hoping that we'll be able to get that out relatively soon. But in addition to that, in the background, I've been coming up with an idea for Regency Solitaire 3 as well. So our sales have gone really well so far. Once we put our game out on the casual portals, we'll get a reading of how well it does there and whether it does as well as we expect. But if it does, then we should follow up with a Regency Solitaire 3. And I've got some really fun ideas for that, which I can't really go into too much detail. But yeah, we've just been really happy to find that we still have it's been, I don't know how many years, 8-9 years since the original Regency Solitaire came out. And in the meantime, we've done all sorts of other things. We decided to circle back around to these sort of characters in this world. And it's just been really sort of heartwarming how many players are just beyond delighted that we've made another game, and they said, this is what we wanted. We wanted more of this. So I'm like, okay, this makes them happy. This is what they want. So almost back to your thing about creativity, I think for my next game, I've got tons of creative ideas about my story and my characters and the setting. I don't think I'm going to mess with the gameplay very much. I'm not going to try and, we're not going to come reinvent the wheel. We don't need to, because that's what our fans aren't telling us. That's what they want. They're saying they just want more of the same thing, and, new fun stories. And that's not to say we'd just be sort of cloning it. There's an awful lot of work and thought we put into our games at all sorts of levels. But yeah, coming up with extremely challenging new gameplay ideas probably isn't where we're heading. But maybe touring around some really beautiful parts of the UK and taking some great reference photos, and coming up with some funny situations that could happen to some eccentric characters in the Regency era is something that's definitely on my on my schedule for the next few months. So I really love that. And like you say about the expanding and contracting, it's sort of like breathing in and breathing out, So yeah, at the moment we're definitely in the phase of trying to get the business phase. We're spreading the game around in different places and finding out where it fits and who we can, join up with to have deals and opportunities, working with other studios and so on and so forth, or other platforms, all that kind of stuff. That's where we are now. But the creativity for the next project is just there, kind of bubbling under the surface, and lots of wild and wacky ideas are kind of popping into our heads as we go along, and we're noting them down and thinking, yeah, okay, we'll just let that percolate, and then in a couple of months' time we'll start rushing and pinning down the details of what it's going to look like. But it's a fun time. It's exciting. It's really, really pleasing to, obviously, after working a couple of years, have it come out, because you need that perseverance to get to the finish line. It can be a bit of a slog. It's and even our game isn't that complicated in the greater scheme of things compared to some games that people work on, that really are such huge, complex pieces of software, and you just think it's a miracle games ever get made, really, considering all the ingredients that have to go into them. So, yeah. Well, relieved at what we've done, and sort of proud of what we've made, and also just looking forward to what we make next, with lots of creativity bursting at the seams and lots of hopefully exciting games to come out in the next 12 to 18 months, I think.
That's awesome. And it's really great to hear. I can see Helen while we're talking, and and I'm sure you could hear it in her voice, just how excited she is about this. But I don't want to break down too much of everything she shared. But one thing that stood out to me was like the points that she made, like, hey, look, we don't need to reinvent the wheels. We have found other really good and creative ways to continue to do this, to not only make the experience fun in different ways, but you can hear it from her in terms of how exciting it is and what they're doing. And they're still catering to, I would say, the same audience. And it could even be, there might be some affinities there too. So it's just like, I think in a way, her response is a really good example of how the process, and I may be oversimplifying it, but is or can be simplified, where it doesn't have to be something always new or super innovative. Throughout this whole conversation, when you were talking, one of the games that kept popping in my head was like Mario Party, Mario Kart. These are very familiar games, folks, that not much has changed with them in terms of the mechanic, new, fun, different, exciting things that are incorporated. And that concept is no different than what you have talked about, than what you guys have done with your games and such. So, and again, it's just one model that out of numerous different models that you can find in everything. But if you can find yourselves in that position, whatever it may be, whatever that model or strategy may be, again, I think it's a perfect way to work towards, that fulfilling sustainability. Because again, I think what you shared was just a prime example in how excited you were about everything you're doing. So I love that you shared that, because it really can give you a different perspective of how things can be simplified if you do have those goals, if you do have things a little bit dialed in, and you're going with that whole concept of expanding and contracting.
Yeah, no, I wake up in the morning and I'm still excited to be making games for sure. And, you know, don't get me wrong, I have a lot of respect for anybody who breaks the mold and comes up with a completely new genre or mashup of game ideas. But in reality, I think it's rare. I think it's actually rare to do that and succeed. Incredibly rare. You know, we just see the very few that break through, that are the success. But the reality, if you look down, you know, any list of games on your phone or on your console or on Steam or whatever, a lot of it's familiar, and you know what you like, and you'll be reaching for another thing like the last thing you played that you liked. So I don't think there's any problem with giving people more of what they like and what they enjoy, especially if you enjoy making it. And we definitely enjoy making our games.
Awesome. Well, it's very clear, and I'm honestly excited for you guys for all these cool new projects that are down the line, and just sounds like a really exciting time for Gray Alien Games. So again, thank you for sharing that. But now as we close, I would love for you to share, like, you know, any tips, advice, suggestions you may have for our listeners today, because we covered quite a lot, but of what we discussed, what are some main things that you would like to, you know, share with our audience today?
Yeah, sure. I think I've got sort of three ideas that I think are important, or which have worked out for me anyway. So the first one would be just to start small. If you're specifically, we're thinking about indie games here. You know, don't bet the farm on your first commercial indie game. And I would just add that also means people who have previously worked in AAA or big studios. And not for the reason that you don't have all kinds of expertise or enthusiasm or creativity, because I'm sure you do have those things, but just for that other reason I was talking about developing business skills and having to wear a lot of hats. Those are the things that most people probably aren't familiar with when they start out. So I'd just say, yeah, start small. Try and just complete a project. Try and just get to the end of making any kind of game. And, you know, if it's a handful of your friends who play it, that's a success. It's just what I said about setting goals. So start small, I think, would be what I'd say. The second thing I'd say would be to play the long game. Because I guess just like I was saying about breakout games that have come up with a completely new type of gameplay and how those are very much celebrated and talked about, they're rare. And another thing that's incredibly rare is overnight successes in this business, and people who make their first game and it's a success. In fact, even there's a lot of people who you might hear about as if they've come out of nowhere. But then if you meet them in person and you chat with them, you find they've actually been grinding away behind the scenes for 5 years and have made X number of other projects that didn't ship or worked things for other people, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's very, very rare for somebody to really just bang out an absolute hit game out of the blue. So yeah, play the long game, build up your skills, build up your experience, build up your contact. Maybe take that contract work in case you learn something from those people. I just think it takes time. Most people do take time to build a successful career, and there's nothing wrong with that. You know, it's the journey, not just the destination. So as long as you're feeling like you're learning and you're growing your skills and you're doing something worthwhile, I think that's what counts. And the final tip, which I've mentioned before, but I'm going to say it again because I think it's really important if you're an indie developer, is to meet up with and possibly befriend other indies. You know, other studios or other indies, they're not the competition. There's so many games out there, there's no way somebody is going to be a direct competitor to you, even if you work in the same genre. For example, we know another studio that makes Voltaire games. We publish their games for them on Steam because they're friendly competition. We work together with them, not directly on a single project, but we give each other tips and hints because, you know, more is more. There's no reason to compete. So yeah, being helpful, give a helping hand to other indies, take their advice if they're giving you helpful advice, share as much as you can. And yeah, we've definitely found some of those relationships have really paid off enormously for us in terms of fantastic deals or opportunities or working relationships. So it might take time, but yeah, you just share and befriend people. And you never know when someone's going to hand you that golden ticket.
Awesome. I love it. Such great advice. And I mean, I really, again, can't thank you enough for emphasizing those points and sharing some additional ones too, because they all play a significant role in working towards sustainability. So thank you for leaving us with those action items, ideas, insights. But unfortunately, we do have to close. It has been an absolute pleasure just listening to you and hearing everything that you shared with us today. But for those who want to find out more about your games, Gray Alien Games, or just want to connect, what are some links? Please share us with any details so people can find out more or connect with you.
Yeah, sure. Well, you can find out more about us and our studio and the games we've made by going to www.grayaliengames.com, and you can click through to various bits of information there. If you wanted to find me on LinkedIn, you can find me there, Helen Carmichael, Gray Alien Games. And I'm also on Twitter as BC Heza, which is a bit of a strange old name, but Heza was a nickname my sister-in-law gave me, and I made my Twitter account whilst I was living in BC, if that helps you to remember it. Anyway, you're welcome to, follow me, message me, whatever on Twitter, get to know me there. We do talk a lot about our games because, marketing. We also have a Patreon, which I'm just going to flag up. The reason I mention it is that we put an awful lot of our sort of lived experience, our game development processes, advice. We put data, quite honest and revealing data about what's going on in our company and where we're making our money from and stuff. So it's quite a game development focused Patreon. Obviously, it would be lovely if you would subscribe, but I do appreciate that not everybody can afford to do that. And I will flag up the fact that the majority of the articles on the Patreon can be accessed free of charge. So you can still get a lot of material from there, even if you decide not to subscribe. And you can find that if you go to Patreon and just search Gray Alien. So we're called Patreon/Gray Alien. That's pretty easy to find. So do check that out. And, feel free to comment. Let us know what you think of the articles on there. Finally, I will just big up my husband and business partner, Jake. If you are interested in sustainable game development, he has one of the most watched GDC talks of all time, which is freely available to watch on YouTube. And it's called How to Survive in Game Dev for 11 Years Without a Hit. Now, I think he made that 7 odd years ago, and we're still going. So I'm guessing the advice still holds. Anyway, do check that out. So his name is Jake Burkett, and it's How to Survive in Game Dev for 11 Years Without a Hit. And I think a lot of people have found that to be a really helpful, and it's also quite an honest talk that talks about the downs as well as the ups of the journey. So you might find that fun to watch.
Yeah. And folks, don't worry if you didn't get all that, or you're trying to hit, back 10 seconds while listening. Those additional resources plus the contacts and other links will be in the show notes. So, check it out. And as a friendly reminder, if you're ever looking for the show notes, they should be in the description of this podcast episode, wherever you're listening it to, or you can visit RenGen Marketing / the last or the episode number. In this case, it should be 345. So rengenmarketing.com / 345 will take you right to those show notes. So you can check out Gray Alien Games Patreon page with all those valuable resources, a majority of which were accessible for free without subscribing. And of course, Jake's talk, one of the most watched GDC talks of all time on how to survive in game dev for 11 years without a hit. Helen, I can't thank you enough for, that additional stuff and just everything for today. So thank you for being on the show today. It was a pleasure.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. It's been fun. It's been really good. Thank you.
Hey, everyone. Thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. RenGen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saab for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners. and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.